Hello, everybody, and welcome into Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities sector. Today is March 12th, 2026. My name is Jesse Day, and before we dive in, standard disclaimer, nothing here is investment advice. Do your own due diligence. And today's guest is the CEO of Oroco Resource, a Canadian mineral exploration company whose flagship Santo Tomás project in northwestern Mexico hosts significant porphyry copper mineralization. It's Ian Graham. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Jesse. Good to be here.
Well, let's start with your assessment of the copper market at present. We're trading near $6 a pound. The tailwinds behind the sector seem very strong, and most analysts believe there will not be enough supply coming online to meet growing demand. How do you see the copper market playing out for 2026, and what are the main catalysts you're watching when it comes to the space?
So, Jesse, absolutely. We're in a buoyant period for copper. That's something going on in the present, so we can report relatively confidently on that. I have to say, I think my view in the past was the copper sector was strong and going to remain strong. But in all honesty, I didn't see $6 copper in 2026. So I would caution anybody listening on my powers of prediction into the future. They're constrained. But the current situation, I think, does underpin the fact that there is likely a very strong future for copper over the next decade or two, and perhaps beyond. And certainly for those of us contemplating development projects, the current circumstances look extremely supportive. So supply constraints, some of the large producers are aging. Obviously, pricing incentivizes a lowering of cutoff grades and definitely allows resource to convert in some of the existing operations. So better pricing definitely underpins copper supply into the future. And certainly then incentivizes some of the new projects to be capitalized and come on stream. But I do believe that the reasonably long-term outlook for copper remains buoyant, remains strong. Demand is increasing. There's various drivers on that, and will demand increase at some of the very high paces that are being predicted? Time will tell, and the pricing will tell. Very high copper prices do constrain some utilization. So there will be a sweet spot in the pricing. But my own belief is that sweet spot will be strong enough to incentivize new production, the lowering of grade of what can be produced in the existing mines, and therefore will incentivize a supply response to the demand curves, particularly for the copper that's most essential. So I am bullish. We at Oroco are bullish, and we're accelerating work on our project in response to what we see are market signals indicating that copper will be well priced into the future, and that the demand will be there for new production. In fact, we suspect that the new production that comes online, might be stressed to actually respond to the upside demand curves that are being predicted. So yeah, I'm very, very, we are very bullish on the sector and want to accelerate work on our project in response to this very, very strong copper market.
Great. Well, we are, of course, going to be diving into Oroco Resource and your Santo Tomás project in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about UBS recently upgrading its copper forecast to $15,000 per ton or $7.50 per pound by the end of Q1 2027. Some might say perhaps that's not high enough, but I want to read a quote from investing.com. It says, "The investment bank has increased its deficit projection for 2026 to 520,000 metric tons compared to a prior forecast of 407,000 metric tons. The widening supply gap underpins the firm's bullish price outlook for the industrial metal." What are your thoughts on their price forecast and deficit projections? Do you think they're on the mark?
Jesse, they may well be on the mark. I do, those are high prices, and given we'll be at around that time in 2027, be selecting price assumptions, long run pricing for the work we're doing. The price of copper will definitely play into that. I have to say to you, I tend to be very conservative. I come from a conservative pricing background in the industry. And so those prices are perhaps above the sort of prices we've been imagining we'll employ in the studies we're planning to do at Oroco and Santo Tomás. So those are really very significant changes in pricing. I tend to be a bit of a sort of pragmatist and say we'll see what the prices are as we go forward. But there's no doubt that, I think almost sector-wide, people are bullish. And the best way to constrain copper prices is to bring the production on. My purpose, I'm an exploration geologist by background, a developer, project developer, and our purpose on Earth is to make sure there's plenty of supply, so that fundamental commodities remain affordable to economic growth. So plus $7 copper, that's a very high price. But there's no doubt that prices at the current range will incentivize abundant new production, and some response to the coming supply gap. So the higher prices tend to help with supply. Certainly, those numbers from UBS are really, they really indicate that we need to get going across the sector on upping supply.
Well, let's talk about the main bearish narrative out there for the copper price, which is the possibility of a global or a US focused recession, as copper is often considered the engine of the economy and closely tied to economic growth. Do you think recession fears are warranted here? And if so, how much could that scenario impact the demand side for copper?
Certainly, recessions occur over time. They tend to, separation between recessions seems to grow, and the actual periods of recession seem to be a little shorter. Remains to be seen whether there's a correction in that narrative into the future. My own view is that copper is so fundamental that whilst recessions would definitely impact copper demand, probably it would be one of the least impacted sectors in terms of demand. Outlook for a recession, quite honestly, that's somewhat above where I prefer to speculate. And my subject space is rather more physical. It's mineral deposits and how they get developed. I think recession, possible. Length of it, probably not too long, I would think. An impact on copper, yes, it would have an impact on copper demand. But my own sense is copper would be one of the less impacted sectors, at least over any meaningful period of time, few months, couple of quarters maybe. But longer than that would seem, that would need to be a very significant recession, I think, to put that sort of pressure on copper.
Let's talk about security issues in Mexico, as your project is in northwestern Mexico. And we've seen some pretty scary headlines as of late with cartel violence in the country, the tragic loss of life with the Vizsla silver workers there in Mexico, executed by the cartel, one of the cartels there. What is your sense of what's happening on the ground? How big is the risk? Is this getting blown out of proportion by the media? What are your thoughts there?
Well, certainly, I think this is a critical issue for us and for Mexico. So, firstly, given that we're a project operating, about 500 kilometers north of Vizsla, we are in the greater neighborhood, albeit in a very different environment with respect to security. But of course, our hearts go out to those impacted, the families, the employees, and Vizsla more broadly. So we mourn that event. The district we're in is on the La Entrada El Pacifico. It's a trade route between Texas and the Pacific, the Port of Topolobampo, and it is a well watched district with respect to security on the Mexican federal government side, as well as an area that the US keeps some view on in collaboration with the Mexicans. In our immediate district, we have a very different situation, much reduced cartel activity to the point of almost none in the last several years to a decade. And we maintain a very sort of close ear to the ground with respect to intelligence on security. And we've done that from the beginning. My wife, Linda, and I were resident in Choix through the COVID era and through 2022 and into 2023. So we have a strong sense for town and the district surrounds. So certainly there are no cartel contests going on in the area around Choix or in our district. So, very, very different circumstance from that in the main road corridor, transport corridor that runs from Mazatlan eastward. So I think we're distinguished from that. However, security in Mexico is a significant issue, and it does pay for people to pay particular attention to the regions that particular operations are in. In terms of going forward, we've brought in a new board member, a guy called Faisal Rodriguez, and Faisal is an operator with Torex Gold. They've grown a number of gold mining operations in challenging areas, and they've done that by following a very specific formula of sticking to their knitting, focusing on what they're doing, and not in any way impacting the other economy that operates proximal to them. So we'll follow that. That said, there's very little in the way of the unofficial economy operating in the sort of 200-300 kilometer radius around our project.
Let us now dive into Oroco Resource and your project. Why don't you start by giving us an overview of the company for those who are new to the story?
Yeah, certainly. Oroco was founded back in 2006 and did some gold exploration work in northwest Mexico. They came across a nice gold project, which they ended up vending to Gold Group. And in that process, the original vendor of that gold project brought them the Santo Tomás copper project. He had some title issues with the project, and the counterparties in those title issues, he asked Oroco to see if we could help tidy those issues up. So Oroco took that on. It took almost 9 years to actually sort the situation out. But in 2020, title was returned to Don Ruben Rodriguez, the rightful title holder. And in return for our efforts, we owned a majority in the project. We've since diluted his family interests down some. We also have partners, Mexican partners in the project. We consolidated the land position around the original title holders' concessions, adding additional concessions, a really nice large sort of buffer land position. In doing so, some interest was awarded to our partners, led by Don Baldo Treviso, who is our sort of community and major support partner on the ground in Choix, and was fundamentally a reason that Linda and I could relocate to Choix with very little Spanish and operate in town and be part of the fabric of what was going on there. So strong Mexican partnerships on the ground. Our new director took a significant interest in the company and a financing last November. And so progressively greater amounts of Mexican DNA as part of the project. So as owners at the project level and at the corporate level. So we're fundamentally a Mexican enterprise with some parties up here in Canada at the corporate management level. That's the project background. What we were chasing in solving those title issues was a known resource that had a pre-feasibility study done on it in the 1990s. So we knew there was a resource to be put together, and we started back in 2021, following some ground geophysics with drilling. So we since put together a PEA, final version of that in August of 2024, and that sort of pointed up a 541 million ton resource of 0.37% copper in the indicated category, and then a very significant inferred resource of 530 million tons at 0.35 copper EQ, dominated by copper. It's a dominantly chalcopyrite resource with a little moly, and in our PEA we put a small molybdenum circuit in for some molybdenite recovery and the creation of a separate con. So we have a concentrate in the PEA, about 26% copper concentrate, make about 400,000 dry metric tons of that annually for about 100,000 tons of contained copper through a 23-year life of mine. And the silver and gold, payable silver and gold, will travel with the copper concentrate, and then a small molybdenum concentrate in addition. So very nice project, putting in copper equivalent terms about 108,000 tons of copper per annum in that foreseen production for 22.6 years. So it's a very nice project. Porphyry copper, as you mentioned at the outset, with a lot of optionality. We sort of have a north zone and a south zone, so it's an elongate ore body, which gives a lot of optionality around mine planning, equipment movements, etc. So we've essentially got two conjoined pits, and we start into some pretty good grades right out of the gate. The first 7 years recover 0.51 copper EQ at an almost zero strip ratio. The ore body's on a hill. Sort of the image behind me shows the pits arraigned on this hill, and the early mining, the first decade almost, has a very, very low strip ratio. And so the economics of the project are very compelling, wherein the NPV8 of almost 1.5 billion US is significantly higher than the PEA estimated initial capex of 1.1 billion tons, billion dollars, sorry. So, very, very nice capex, initial capex to NPV ratio. So really, really compelling project economically.
Well, let's dive into the team behind Oroco and how you plan to leverage their expertise to move this project forward, starting with yourself and your own background and how you came to take the helm at the company.
Yeah, I joined Oroco in 2019, and currently serve as the president. We did that when I went down to Mexico. That the president has a very, very strong cachet in Mexico in terms of titles. So we did that then. Chairman and founder of the company, Craig Derail, longtime entrepreneur. For our PEA work, we brought in Richard Locke. He has served as CEO on a contract term, and really led the PEA with a focus on those capex and opex costs, particularly the capex. And the long period of legals was led by David Rose. He is the corporate secretary, but has a legal background, and really is what teed us up to do that legal work to acquire Santo Tomás. And a very, very strong team on the ground, young team in Mexico that we put together through COVID, so led by some young geologists and engineers who learned a lot through the PEA and are going to be very influential through the PFS. My mining background's Anglo Rio Tinto, although I've been in the junior company space for over a decade now. And similarly for Andrew Ware, our lead QP, for Richard. Mining and project development focus. I worked with Richard at Diavik 26 years ago, and he put that into production, having put several other projects into production. So yeah, we're a mining project team, and just love developing projects. One of the attractions of Santo Tomás is our view that the project is very buildable, and that the sort of period of construction and the complexity is such that it will certainly be a strong contender to hit its timelines and its capex plans. So yeah, very buildable and a very, very compelling project economically.
You recently announced the start of Phase 2 drilling at Santo Tomás, including plans to undertake a pre-feasibility study. Walk us through those details and the highlights investors should be paying attention to.
Yes, certainly. So we're really excited to remobilize now on to do the PFS work, and that will focus on converting that inferred resource that I spoke about earlier into an indicated resource. So when we put that together, we're going to have a plus 1 billion ton resource in the indicated category that we can then set an optimized mine plan over. So we're expecting to do about 20 to 25,000 meters of drilling. That will include the resource conversion work. It will also include more geotechnical, metallurgical, and hydrological drilling that's required to put the more detailed PFS together. So that pre-feasibility study will, contemplate an integrated mine plan, somewhat optimized, that will underwrite, the fundamental outlook for the project. We don't anticipate a large change in the resource as a result of the work, although we do see a little bit of grade upside and tons upside at the South Zone. And but once we've done that work, we'll be able to lean in on an optimized mine plan. We're also doing some additional metallurgy. We did some trade-off work with Whittle Consulting, and Whittle have identified some opportunities that will increase throughput and decrease some of the energy requirements because they see a fairly substantial opportunity for more readily milled rock in the ore body as defined. So our PEA metallurgy was skewed a little to some of the harder rock intervals. And so we expect the energy requirements on aggregate for processing North and South Zone to come down, particularly at South Zone. So, little opportunities to improve the economics and energy requirements of the project. So we're really looking forward to being able to demonstrate those additional value opportunities.
Talk to us about the company's cash position. How much cash do you have on hand? How much runway does it give you? And how do you plan to raise more capital when needed?
Certainly. So cash position is good presently. We did a bought deal financing in early January led by Canaccord. And that was a $23 million Canadian financing. Current cash position is somewhere over 19 million. We've spent quite a bit of money just mobilizing phase phase 2 and sort of reinvesting a little bit in equipment, plant, etc. And we have a drill on site presently, but we're going to scale up steadily over the next month, 6 weeks, and then look to complete the drilling in October, November, depending on the specific requirements of the hydrological drilling, etc. So all drilling this year. We will come back to the market for further financing. All the drilling work is funded, and much of the technical on-site work required for a pre-feasibility study is funded. But next year, the PFS itself and some of the details of the desktop work, trade-offs, etc., will require financing. So we could come back to the market shortly. I think we'll be opportunistic, but definitely in the course of sort of before the end of Q3, I would expect we're back in the market for a further financing.
Well, is there anything that we have not yet discussed, or anything that you think it's important to emphasize the potential shareholders of Oroco Resource should be focused on?
No, I think we've covered all the major bases. I think the one thing that is just, that I enjoy particularly for this project is the fact that we have community support. And so since our 2024 PEA, we haven't sort of started phase 2. That was noticed in the community. And we hesitated with that as a result of what we perceived were potential permitting headwinds in Mexico, messages coming from the federal government regarding open pit mines. However, the community, on a very broad basis, including to the town of El Fuerte, which is a 40-minute drive from Choix, actually went to their federal representatives, in particular a congressman called Mario Zamora, and asked the politicians to intercede on our behalf, ensure we were safe to permit, and that resulted in us being added to Plan Mexico, which is the list of nominated projects for development, large capital projects in Mexico. So that was bottom-up driven. That was the community coming in and asking the politicians to fast-track us. And so that level of community support from the villages through the towns of Choix and El Fuerte, I've never seen before in a project. Very gratifying, and I think just driven by their very real understanding of how mining helps a district. The El Sosal mine operated east of us for a decade, from 2004 to 2014. And the community is fully aware that since that operation ended, the economy in the region has been somewhat constrained. So it's a bottom-up support, and actually just exceeded our expectations over the last year. So that's been really gratifying. And now our duty, now that we're financed, is to repay that support with a rapidly advancing project. And that's our intent.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to put links in the description below to the Oroco Resource website, as well as social media profile for people who want to follow along with the company. Ian, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks very much, Jesse. Enjoyed it immensely.
Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.